important is how the need for multiple modes of transportation can really connect the regional efforts of what is almost like 4 or 5 states in Ohio. And what's so important about this proposed line is the fact that it's about the connectivity of mid-sized cities through the Midwest. And what we find as mid-sized cities, as Dayton is that without that connection, it doesn't allow us to really move and allow opportunities for people in our community to get good paying jobs, not only in the Dayton region, but for this example will be very helpful for Dayton, as we are an hour west of Columbus and about 50 miles north of Cincinnati. And so making sure that folks can move easily between the cities will really expand regional opportunities for all 3 people that live at 3 groups of those regions, particularly for day-to-day travel. 25% of the people in my community don't have access to a car. So every single day, the decision on how they get around is based on public transportation, and that really limits their opportunity. And then leaving the community or leaving even the county is too hard of a lift for folks to really have access to high quality jobs and to really do the things they need to do, whether it's getting education or overall training for better paying jobs. And so Amtrak is so key because of the access it offers to folks that may not have access to a car. It also means, cleaner air. Dayton is in a valley, and we know we lead the country in some cases on asthma for young children. And we know that Amtrak is 83% more efficient than driving and 73% more efficient than flying. And when you're talking about when I go visit Mayor Jackson, it's about a 3.5-hour drive. It's more easy for people to move between our state is really key. But I think the most important thing is, look, Ohio is the heart of it all. And so if we really want to have national transportation through train service, if we really want to have that next step to make sure that we aren't relying just on the highway system in our country, we have to get transit through Ohio. It is key for the interstate, inside INNER state transportation that we have, but for interstate transportation as well, as we need to be part of what we know the entire country is doing, which is using rail transport to move not only goods but people. That's why we support this in Dayton. We know that the effort to have this system for the state of Ohio will be key for us to connect to our friends and our other communities, create good paying jobs, but then also this kind of design and development for transit-oriented design helps build our downtowns too. And we know the key to growth in Ohio is through our center cities and through our downtowns. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. I want to congratulate you, Bill and Stephen, for reaching out to us. This is something that Amtrak has driven, and we are, I think, very excited to get on board. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to William Murdoch from Morpsey to talk about Central Ohio.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Mayor Whaley, and to Bill and Steve. Thanks to Amtrak for pulling this together. We're very excited about improving and extending service to Ohio. So at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, our friends call us Morpsey. We represent the fastest growing region in the Midwest over the last decade. And our work is with 75 local governments across our region and along these corridors. And what we're planning for is the future, and we're planning for prosperity. And to do this right, we know that being a hub on the nation's passenger rail network would be an incredible leap forward for regions like ours and Dayton's that aren't even on the network today. So when we think about the situation right now, being in the Columbus region, we're the largest city in the country without any sort of fixed rail for passengers. So second largest without Amtrak, but largest in the country without any fixed rail. And we're the 15th largest city. We've added 250,000 people in just the last decade. Not being on that network puts us at a disadvantage. And when we look at Ohio, we're the 7th largest state, but we don't even have what's considered to be minimum service or infrastructure compared to the states that we compete with, like the Mayor Whaley had said, like places like Texas or North Carolina. And in Ohio, we want to compete in a global economy, and Columbus and the towns in our region can't do that if we're not on that network, which is why we're so excited about this possibility. And so what's the solution that we're working on? In Columbus, we've been squarely focused on building connections to neighboring regions in Ohio and elsewhere. And we want to give people robust options. So if they can't or don't want to drive, or if they don't want to pay to fly, they can still travel interstate. They can travel within Ohio to get the work they need done to visit family members. And we know that our residents and businesses are both clamoring for this. And so we're the metropolitan planning organization in our region, and we do the work of transportation planning. And there is real work that's been happening on this over the last 10 years. Environmental impact studies, passenger forecasts, making the business case. We know how to do this. We know the communities behind it, and the partnerships are there. And so Amtrak's looking at Ohio and investing in Ohio, we think makes a lot of sense. And we think this approach is not just a lot of sense, it's common sense. Like Mayor Horning-Pitt said, this is one that's grounded not just in connecting major cities like Dayton and Cleveland and Columbus, but it's really important to our rural areas, our smaller metros, to give them access to jobs and businesses, and vice versa, to make it easier for businesses to invest in these areas and have access to workforce. So real quick, I want to talk about the corridors here. So the 3C&D corridor, we think is one of the most strong potential ridership markets that Amtrak could look at. There are tight personal and business connections between these cities. We have Ohio State alumni all up and down the corridor, and that's not a small amount of people. To Mayor Whaley's point, there are more people in Cincinnati, Dayton, and Columbus regions than there are in the whole state of Colorado. Yet in the Northeast Ohio, Cleveland area, and we're the size of Washington or Virginia, just along this one route. But we're really limited by the options that we have right now. And it's complicated to try to build our way out of this with highways. And if we can't add passenger rail, then we really can't leverage major employment hubs like Wright-Patt or Ohio State. If you really want to strengthen the heartland and leverage rural Ohio and take advantage of the rail supply industry we have right here, the network has to serve the interior of Ohio. And I do want to mention that Amtrak has been so kind to us. Our region's been working on a complementary corridor to connect Chicago to Columbus and Pittsburgh. And a lot of work's been done, a lot of partnerships. We don't think of it just as a Columbus route. Adding Pittsburgh would open up Pittsburgh to Dayton and the East Coast. Adding Chicago would come right through Ohio Smart Mobility Corridor. So we think that could only strengthen 3C&D. The last thing I wanted to mention is the impact on freight. And we think a lot about logistics in Ohio. Mayor Jackson knows this with Cleveland being such a hub. Columbus is a hub. Other parts of Ohio are really tied into logistics. We like to think of it as we connect the heartland to the world. And freight rail is an important backbone to that. And why do I mention this on an Amtrak call? It's because implementing passenger rail gives us that opportunity to improve the freight system at the same time. If we want to get to the speed to serve both, this is the way we can improve the system. And we think these things are mutually compatible. So last point, and then I'll turn it back over to Stephen. Today, MORPC and its partners released 30 major letters of support for rail that serves the interior of Ohio. Major cities up and down these corridors that want the interior Ohio served and connects us to our neighbors and places outside the state. There's really strong support from cities and regions of all sizes to get this done. And you can tell I'm enthusiastic. We're ready to get to work, and we're looking forward to working with our partners across the state and Amtrak to move this forward. So I'll turn it back over to Stephen.
Thank you, William. A great explanation about how important this service could be. And we couldn't agree with you more. We believe rail needs to do so much more in the nation if we're going to grow economically, if we're going to accommodate that nearly what people expect, 400 million people who could live in this nation around 2050 or thereafter. And if we're going to address the climate crisis that's coming up quickly across the whole globe, we've got to have rail do more. And that means both passenger and freight. And we can do it together. We can make investments that both enhance the passenger network, creating services like the ones we're talking about today, and also speeding up and decongesting freight rail service so that trains can move quickly and deliver, just as you said, that incredible supply chain that's based in so many cases in Ohio. So Let me also thank all of our mayors, Mayor Horning-Pitt, Mayor Jackson, Mayor Whaley. Great remarks, and we are so honored to have you with us today and have your enthusiasm come so clearly through. So with that, we're going to turn it over to our media guests here and let them ask a panel a few questions, and we'll get started. So thanks very much for joining us, and let's get the questions rolling.
Thank you, Stephen. As a reminder, the way to ask a question is use the raise hand option located at the bottom of your screen, and we will call on you in the order your hand was raised. When we call on you, please state your name and your media outlet, and then state your question. All right, it looks like Tom Bosco, you are up.
Hi, everybody. Tom Bosco from ABC6 in Columbus here. So I think a big question, there's so many questions that I could ask about specifics and logistics, but when do you see trains beginning to travel these routes? How much would tickets be? What about the infrastructure at the stations? I know those are some specifics, but if you could address any of those, that'd be super. Thank you.
Hey, Tom, it's Stephen. Let me start there by saying, look, there's clearly going to be some work necessary to be able to turn this vision into reality. You named some of the exact issues that are common across any increase in service or new service that we handle across the nation. But I want to make it clear that these are not insurmountable challenges. These are things that we do across our network. We're busy planning new routes across the United States, and we have long existing relationships with all of our host railroads across the nation. So part of the question, of course, is how quickly can this service come to pass? Is there the support necessary from both the federal government and the states to make it happen? Those are things we're working on. Clearly, our hope is that with the vision we've put forward and with the support from folks like you've heard today from the mayors here and from William, we can get interest in Congress and the administration to make investments for services like this. We do believe that we could start relatively quickly with initial service levels. As I described in my briefing, we would start with probably a trip time of about 5.5 hours initially, but with a program of improvement and investment, we could significantly improve that trip time and add more frequencies. So the work to do that will come with the railroads over which we would operate. And as you mentioned, stations, we have locations in Cincinnati and Cleveland, but we would have to work in the intermediate cities and, of course, in Columbus and Dayton to develop station locations. But we're busy doing that work right now for our proposed Gulf Coast service. And, there are ways to get service started quickly if we have the support and energy of the stakeholders and parties. So I think our goal here is to achieve this broad vision, of course, by 2035. We think the corridor in Ohio is a place we want to start early, and we're looking for the support at the local level to show that that's a good investment for the federal government, and of course, making the pitch to our federal partners about creating a long-term program that can provide the funding to Amtrak and to our state partners to make investments like this one.
And next we have Tom Jackson.
I was wondering what the state government in Ohio has to do to make this a reality. I seem to recall we had a chance for a connection between Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati during the Kasich administration, and they turned down funding. Is this something that you can only do if the DeWine administration supports it?
Thanks, Tom. Stephen again, president here at Amtrak. Good question, and let me also open it up to others. But we will be looking for a partnership with the state and also communities necessary to support this service. Having said that, we are advocating that the federal government provide upfront capital funding and some initial operating support to help lessen any financial obligations that are required of our states as part of starting new service like this. So we do operate corridors like the one in Ohio across the United States with 20 state partners. Again, they make up half of our service and ridership across the US. So there's a well-established partnership between states and Amtrak. We're anxious to work with the state to look at what that partnership could be and to develop a model that makes sense for Ohio and that's consistent with our other models across the nation. Part of that, of course, is also reliant on the federal government and Congress and administration's desire to invest in opportunities like this. But we believe that the federal government has a role in helping to start corridors like these, and that states have an obligation too to support them over time. So we're trying to engineer that balance so that we can get these services started. And in a place like Ohio with the incredible population, the great transit that exists already, and the integration of the economy, it's just a natural that we start in a place like Ohio.
Yeah, I'll just add, Stephen, and you've covered it, but the key points, we certainly aren't going to start service without a good level of local support, because there's a lot to get accomplished and we need to all be pulling in the same direction. The funding model that Stephen talked about for the first 5 years of the funding, and largely capital, would be federally funded, would come through Amtrak, and then ultimately transition to the state. That's different, I think, than prior. Well, I know it's different than prior approaches, or the initiative that you referenced from quite some time ago. And the economic situation is different. The awareness of environmental considerations is certainly different across the country and here. And several of the mayors here talked about just the great growth that these communities and communities in Ohio have experienced overall. And so we think the demand perhaps could even be greater as well. I'll stop there and turn it over.
I was just going to add one more thing. 10 years ago, and maybe William might have some comments too here. 10 years ago, it was more state driven than Amtrak driven. And I think that makes this a key difference than before, right? This is part of the connection overall nationally. Ohio benefits greatly being in the center of the country on this, but Amtrak driving this, I think, makes it a different story than what it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, if I could echo that, Mayor, I think that's exactly right. I mean, in our work with passenger rail evaluation over the last few years, I don't want to speak for the state, but the state of Ohio, our friends at ODOT, have been kind collaborators as we've been evaluating these corridors. And we think that what might be different this time is the cities and the regions on this call are really focused on a strong business case here to give Ohioans a choice to be more competitive. And we see this as something that cuts across the big town, small town, suburban divide. Our work at Morpsey is nonpartisan. We're working across the corridors. I mentioned the 30 letters we released today. You will find Democrats and Republicans and administrators all clamoring for this service in Ohio. And we think that sets us up for a really strong argument to make the business case to Amtrak and to the state of Ohio.
And up next, we have Carl Hunell.
Good afternoon. My name is Carl Hunell. I work for Richland Source based in Mansfield and also over in Crestline. Couple of questions. One, discuss for me, if you would, the current on-time status or the current on-time ability that Amtrak has had. And secondly, what do you think is the best possibility or the best way to get your funding through Congress? Is it going to be as part of an overall bill, or is something separate? What do you see as the best path forward toward getting that funding?
Thanks, Carl. This is Stephen Gardner. And well, to go to your first question about on-time performance, let's let's break it down into a couple of different areas of our service. We operate really three different types of service: our long distance service connecting the United States, our and major regions, our corridors like the one we're proposing here in Ohio, and then our Northeast Corridor service. And depending on the service and the type, we aim for and achieve in many cases better than 80% on-time performance. Now, certainly there are corridors, particularly our long-distance corridors, where trains are traveling 2,000 miles over several days across the nation, where performance has been considerably worse than that, and that remains a challenge for Amtrak. But in corridors where we have been able to work with our host railroads and make investments, we achieve some great on-time performance. Our Hiawatha corridor is a great example, as Bill mentioned or in his remarks, connecting Chicago and Milwaukee, where we typically have high 80s, sometimes low 90 on-time performance, 90%. So it's absolutely possible, and in fact happens all the time, that we are able to achieve good on-time performance and reliability. However, as part of our push for a program to support this type of service, we are also asking Congress to affirm the rights of Amtrak to operate over our host railroads with the preference that's the law provides. Today, we find, unfortunately, that preference isn't always provided by some of our host carriers, and we need that preference to be able to operate on time. Additionally, we're making sure through our actions and again through hopefully improvements in Congress, that we have the access to the freight railroads that has been provided to Amtrak, that we can use the tracks when we need to operate services like these. So this leads to the second question, which is, how do we see all this coming together through Congress? There are a number of paths, but we certainly are looking forward to the Surface Transportation Program reauthorization. This is a set of laws that govern surface transportation in the United States and provide funding. Amtrak is part of that overall package, and Congress is working now to establish a new set of laws to fund and guide those programs over the next 5 years. Obviously, that also can dovetail with the infrastructure package, the American Jobs Plan that's been put forward by President Biden and other infrastructure initiatives. So we'll see how Congress and the administration works to advance those. But what I think is critical for this corridor is that there's a strong push from states like Ohio, from communities like those you see here today, telling Congress and the administration that passenger rail needs to be part of the future of the American transportation system, that it has a big role to play, and that communities like these in Ohio, a state like Ohio, which has been underserved fundamentally for now decades by the Amtrak system, even though it's got good markets, even though it's got good population and real growth and a real need, they need to be served. And with that message, I'm sure that Congress can figure out a way to provide the funding both through Amtrak and through states to make a corridor like this happen.
And I'll just add to the questioner that we measure on time on an individual rider basis, so it's not an aggregate or an average. So we look at each individual rider. On time is within 15 minutes, and of course that drives our efforts to improve service, and certainly to improve customer satisfaction. And the other thing that we have seen over the last several years, continued increases in overall customer satisfaction. And we do also measure that at an individual customer basis, and we can measure that during their trip. So we're taking all that information and data in to improve service, to drive our investments, and to ultimately offer to the citizens in Ohio a service that's trip time competitive, that's attractive to them, and it's a choice, a real choice for them in terms of how they're going to travel.
And next we have Cynthia Rose.
Hello, this is Cynthia from NBC4. I am just wondering if you've had any indication from DeWine's office about what he thinks about this, if he's going to back it. And also, Mayor Ginther isn't on this call. Is there any indication from Mayor Ginther as to whether he plans to back what's going on?
Well, let me take the first question. Thank you for that. We are actively discussing our reauthorization proposal on the Hill in the Senate and the House. Amtrak recently released its request for funding for the next fiscal year, which included some of these points. So I think the committees are just starting this process, and members are being briefed about our vision. And so what I would say about any of the offices here is that now is the time for folks to reach out to their House offices and Senate offices and talk about what they see as the opportunity for passenger rail. We certainly do hope that we'll have support from the delegations here, but that is work to come, and we remain focused on talking about the way that Amtrak can provide value and partner with Ohio to deliver this service here in the future.
And thank you, Stephen. And if I can speak on Columbus, I don't need to actually speak for the city of Columbus, because in a press release we released earlier today, we provided the letter of support from Mayor Ginther. And in addition to that, Columbus City Council recently passed a resolution of support for this. That's along with a number of other communities in our region that are on record supporting this. So we believe we got strong support by the city. They've funded our evaluation efforts over the last few years of passenger rail corridors out of Columbus, and are pretty strong proponents for it. So we'll, if it's helpful, we can share that with you for your story after this session.
And next we have Susan Glasser.
Yeah, hi, Susan from the Plain Dealer on Cleveland.com. I would like to press you a little bit more on how, I mean, assuming everything goes as well as you could hope in Congress, how quickly you think the 3C and D corridor might start, optimistically. And a subsequent question is, you know, I can drive from Cleveland to Cincinnati in 4 hours. And so I wonder, you know, what the top speed will be at the beginning, and how important it is to get that travel time down to approximately 4 hours, and how quickly and challenging that will be. I think, you know, you realize part of what torpedoed this plan 10 years ago was that people thought it, you know, it wasn't going to be competitive with driving on the highway.
Thanks, Susan. Good questions. So I want to be clear here. Our goal would be, if we have funding to advance projects like these, would be to very quickly work in partnership with the respective states to find out where we have the level of commitment and enthusiasm and support to move forward on developing services. The reason I can't give you a firm answer on exactly how quickly we could do this is because it really depends on Amtrak and the host railroads negotiations to allow us to use the infrastructure. Now, I will say very clearly that we believe that in almost all the sort of corridors we've identified, we could start an initial service, maybe one round trip or a few, without much initial investment, using current track speeds. And that's what that 5.5 hour trip time would be. These routes, for the most part, have speeds of 79 miles an hour at the maximum. And if through negotiations with our host railroads, if we have willing partners, and also assuming again that we have the rights that we have under law and that they're clear, that we believe we could get started here in hopefully what would be relatively short period of a couple of years with an initial service. But your point about trip time is well taken. Our goal is, in fact, our mission by law is to create trip time competitive service. And so that's why you saw on my slide that our aim is to get to about 455. We think that's reasonable with a series of investments that could raise speeds above 79 miles an hour and deliver the kind of what we consider trip time competitive service, which is sort of in the ballpark of driving, as you saw in my example of the other corridors, where we get in that sort of half hour, give or take, zone around driving time. We really are a competitive choice. And that's because, you know, let's be honest. Most people on a drive like the drive you've just described will take a stop. They'll take a stop to use the restroom, to have a snack, all those things. They will add time to their trip. You can do all that on board. Meanwhile, the time on the train is productive time, which is not the same as driving time. You can work, you can have access to Wi-Fi, you can socialize, you can walk around. It's a much more comfortable and productive method. And that's why we see, even though in many markets we're a little longer than driving, still people coming to ride the train, and in fact growing ridership. If you look at the new generation, the millennials and Gen Z, half of Americans now are waiting to get their driver's license until they're older than 18. The younger generation just is not interested in driving, and fundamentally requires different options to get around. And we're trying to create a productive, reliable, frequent choice to connect cities and towns across America. So we are focused on trip time. We think there's a good path there. It's going to take collaboration with our host railroads, and it's going to take a source of funding for us to make the capital investments that drive reduced trip time. But this route has the infrastructure in place to do it. If you go back and look at the trip times that were possible in the 1950s and 60s, you can see that it was possible. It was in fact done. And we think we can get there. Again, it's going to take that commitment and support at the local level and from Congress. But if we have that in place, we're ready to focus aggressively on making service in Ohio happen.
And the other thing to add to that too is we're talking about trip time between Cleveland and Cincinnati, and how, and Stephen talked about how we can improve that as it gets speeds up with modest investments along the route. But it's not all end-to-end transport, right? It's Cleveland to Columbus, it's Cleveland to Dayton, it's Cleveland to Cincinnati, of course. It's Columbus to Dayton, Columbus to Cincinnati, and Dayton to Cincinnati. And so when we talk about ridership and ridership levels, it'll be those kinds of origin and destination pairs on the corridor that'll build ridership. And as we improve transit time between those pairs, ridership will grow.
Yeah, and I would add to that, if we can add the additional service we've discussed in Ohio, we can also create opportunities for Cleveland to Detroit. I mean, other types of extended city pairs where you're really building that Midwest connectivity, bringing together that
Absolutely
economy and creating additional value, and being able to do that without a car. And in markets that today air has in many cases abandoned, and is likely to face considerable pressure to not serve given the difficulties in the air market.
All right, we're going to go ahead and turn over to closing comments. And William Murdoch, would you go ahead and want to start with the closing comments there?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And we really appreciate this conversation about Amtrak expanding service to the heart of Ohio and connecting cities like Dayton and Crestline and Columbus and Delaware that haven't had that option in decades. When we think about what that is, that would be an investment in Ohio. And with the nation turning its eyes to passenger rail, again, we want very much for that investment, not just to go to our friends in the Northeast Corridor or other states. We want it to go to Ohio so that we can be more competitive and that we can give people that option. We're really honed in on the equity question too. And when we think about this isn't just about business and competitiveness. It's about serving underserved communities. It's about access. Our population is aging and they need more choices or want more choices. When we think about competing for talent, our younger population arrives in Columbus and the first question they ask is, well, where's the train stop? And our business community demands those choices. And if they can't find it, they move to places that have it. And so we think we have a really strong market case for passenger rail in Ohio. We've got a very strong argument for equity and for access. And we think this is not just a big city thing, it's for cities large and small that are clamoring for this option. And so we really look forward to the work with Amtrak and our partners on this call and elsewhere to get this done. And I think you're going to see a lot of effort and a lot of movement and enthusiasm around this. And I'll turn it to our friends in Dayton, Mayor Whaley.
Thanks, William, and thank you, Amtrak, for inviting mayors across the state of Ohio and MORPC to be on this call with you as we really work to advocate the connectivity of Ohio to the rest of the country. I think the point that we talked a little bit on is particularly young people, something that besides the Columbus Metro, we are in desperate need of in metros across the state of Ohio. And this connectivity and this need to make sure that not everybody's driving and that we're really pushing our regions to the next generation is really, really important. We want our young people to be able to stay in communities like Dayton, like Crestline, like Cleveland, but they have to have connectivity to good paying jobs. They have to be able to get to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base or to Ohio State University or to the University of Cincinnati or Procter & Gamble. The list goes on, but we cannot do that if we are only connected by highways. We're advocating Congress to take action on this. This is in the American Jobs Plan. We fully support it. And it's not just me. I'm not just like MORPC has groups of folks that are supporting in the central Ohio region. We are too. We're proud to have the University of Dayton, Sinclair Community College, our folks at the Dayton Development Coalition, the Dayton Chamber, all coming together to advocate to make sure that we have the future of rail and that it is going through Dayton, Ohio. Really appreciate this opportunity to talk about what this could mean for our state going down the pike. And with that, I'll turn it to my friend up north, Mayor Frank Jackson.
Well, thank you, Mayor. We simply don't have the luxury of choosing not to do this or even making the mistake of not doing it. It is about positioning Ohio for the future. And this is not a question of being a rural or urban or suburban or Democrat or Republican. It's about, do we as Ohioans want to be positioned to be competitive in the world and in this nation? So we don't have the luxury of standing still, because standing still means you're going backwards. And so I'll turn it over to my colleague in Crestline.
Thank you, Mayor Jackson, and thank you everyone in Amtrak for having this forum today. It's I just echo everything that everybody says, and I now know why it's not good to be last. But anyways, for us, I agree that we can have more. Why we have more rural here in Crestline is that, I have taken the trip down to I-71 to Columbus recently, and with my aging parents, and I've got to tell you, I have to be the driver. And so I think that with our aging population, that they will take the train more here. And then also the construction that we ran into it was stressful, and I'm the driver, and it was stressful on my parents because of probably my driving, but needless to say, if we were on the train together, we could have family time. And I also see people riding the train going to work, because we are becoming a bedroom community. And I believe that they can get on the train and go to Cleveland, go to Columbus for work, and they can go to work and be there relaxed and take the train home at night as well. So we're all for it. Crestline is all for it. My surrounding mayors have all contacted me. They are all for it. And so we will also be pushing our resolutions through to make sure, our state senator, Bill Reineke, was at our press release, as well as our state rep, Reardon McLean, and they have also come out to say they are endorsing this. So we're working our magic to get our state reps and state senators on board. And my community is fully backing Amtrak. Thank you. And whatever we can do, we'll step up and make it happen. And now back to Stephen, I believe.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, it's been a great pleasure to have each of you join this event and articulate so clearly and with so much energy the opportunity that I think we all sense. And frankly, the chance to rectify what we see as a great omission in Amtrak's network, and really provide 21st century transportation options. I know folks think about rail and many think of the 19th or 20th century, but we at Amtrak, after half a century here, as we celebrate our 50th anniversary, think our best years are ahead, because rail has so much more to do in the United States. And the United States, as many people forget, has the largest rail network in the world by a factor of 2. We just don't use a lot of it for passenger trains, but Ohio has got a great rail network and a huge opportunity ahead to make more use of it, to deliver people, whether it's that family or friends visit, whether it's that trip to work, whether it's that opportunity to get an education for so many of the tremendous universities and colleges along this route. It's a huge potential market and a great service, and Amtrak stands ready to partner with all of you to make it happen. So thanks so much. We appreciate it. We appreciate everyone who joined today and all the great questions. And with that, we're going to bring the event to an end here, and wish everyone a great afternoon. And thanks again for their partnership. And Bill, I'm just going to turn it over to you for a closing word.
Yeah, a real brief closing word. First of all, thank you to everybody who joined our session today. We didn't have time for a lot of questions, and you may certainly have some more questions. We'll be very happy to take them. I certainly want to thank our mayors, Mayor Jackson, Mayor Horning-Pitt, Mayor Whaley for joining us, and Mr. Murdoch from MORPC. I've learned a new acronym today for joining us as well. Look, Ohio is at the center of the country. It's clearly at the center of the great history of railroading in the United States. So you think about the two predecessor railroads, the B&O and the C&O, and just the manufacturing hub that Ohio represents. 18 of the Fortune 500 companies that are in Ohio, many of the great universities and colleges that are also in Ohio. There's a real opportunity here, and it's certainly our goal to work with state leaders and the federal government and municipal and town leaders to get this done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Thank you for our panelists for your time, and thank you, everybody from the media. If anybody from the media has any additional questions, please reach out to Amtrak Media Relations. And we thank you again for your time today, and have a great evening.